Part 1: The Distress Call. The Collective had ruled the Orion sector for 3,000 years. They were a coalition of 12 alien species who had conquered every challenge the galaxy had thrown at them. Their fleets numbered in the thousands. Their technology was considered the finest in known space. Their military had not faced a real threat in over 500 years. So when their deep space sensors detected a small energy signature entering their territory from an uncharted region of the galaxy, they did not worry. The signature was too weak to be a warship, too small to be a threat. The officers on duty assumed it was a primitive shuttle from some backwater civilization, perhaps refugees seeking asylum, perhaps traders hopping to establish contact. Either way, it was nothing that required serious attention. Admiral of the High Command received the report during his morning briefing. He barely glanced at the sensor data before issuing his orders. He dispatched a single patrol cruiser to intercept the vessel near the nebula. The cruiser would scan the newcomers, determine their threat level, and either welcome them or destroy them depending on their behavior. It was standard procedure. Routine. Captain commanded the patrol cruiser. He was a veteran officer with 40 years of service to the Collective. He had seen primitive species before. They always reacted the same way when they encountered technology. Fear, awe, submission. He expected nothing different from these newcomers. His cruiser reached the intercept point and activated its long-range scanners. The alien vessel was still too far away to see clearly, but the initial readings suggested it was larger than expected. Adjusted his scanners and tried again. The readings came back even stranger. The vessel was not small at all. It was massive, and it was getting bigger the closer it got. Felt the first hint of unease creep into his mind. He ordered his crew to maintain course and prepare a standard first contact hail. Whatever this ship was, the Collective would handle it. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Resolute, Commander Cole stood on the bridge of humanity's most advanced warship. The Resolute was not a shuttle. She was not a transport. She was not an exploration vessel. She was a dreadnought-class battleship, 3 kilometers long from bow to stern, armed with enough firepower to crack a planet in half. Was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been fighting wars since he was 18 years old. First against other humans during the solar conflicts, then against the Syndicate, the machine empire that had emerged from the outer rim and begun consuming human colonies one by one. He had watched friends die. He had watched worlds burn. He had buried his wife and his son in the ashes of a colony that no longer existed. Now he was on a mission that would determine the fate of his species. Earth was under siege. The Syndicate fleets were closing in from every direction. Humanity needed allies and had been sent to find them. The Resolute had traveled farther than any human ship in history, crossing vast stretches of empty space in search of civilizations that might help them survive. The alien signal came through the communication array. Lieutenant Morgan, the ship's communications officer, translated it quickly. She was young, barely 25, but she had a gift for languages that had made her invaluable on this mission. She looked up with concern on her face. The aliens were ordering them to surrender. They were demanding that the Resolute cut its engines, lower its shields, and prepare for boarding. They were threatening destruction if humanity did not comply. Listened to the translation without expression. He had expected something like this. First contact with alien species rarely went smoothly. He had hoped for better, but he had prepared for worse. He asked to open a channel to the alien vessel. He would try diplomacy first. He would explain who they were and why they had come. He would offer friendship and trade and alliance. If the aliens were reasonable, perhaps they could avoid unnecessary conflict. Opened the channel and spoke. He introduced himself as the commander of a vessel from a distant region of the galaxy. He explained that his people were at war with a terrible enemy. He said that humanity sought allies and friends, not conflict. He asked for permission to speak with the alien leadership. The response came back cold and dismissive. The alien captain did not care about humanity's problems. The collective did not involve itself in distant wars. The newcomers would surrender or be destroyed. There was no third option. Closed the channel and sighed. He had really hoped this would go differently. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the ship's tactical officer, reported new contacts on the sensors. More alien ships were approaching. 15 cruisers, all heavily armed, all moving into attack formation. The single patrol cruiser had called for reinforcements. Studied the tactical display carefully. The alien vessels were impressive by galactic standards. Their weapons were powerful. Their shields were strong. They moved with the confidence of a military force that had never known defeat, but had spent his entire life fighting enemies that him. He had learned to read opposing forces the way other men read books, and what he saw in these alien ships was something dangerous. Complacency. These aliens had ruled their sector for 3,000 years. They had forgotten what real war looked like. They had forgotten the desperation of fighting for survival. They had grown soft and arrogant and blind. Did not want to fight them. He had not come here to make enemies, but he would not surrender his ship and his crew to aliens who saw them as primitives to be captured and studied. He turned to his executive officer, Commander Mitchell, and ordered the crew to battle stations. The Resolute came alive around them. 12,000 men and women moved to their posts with the precision of a species that had been at war for 300 years. Weapons systems powered up. Shields reached full strength. Targeting computers locked onto the approaching alien fleet. Watched the alien ships draw closer. He gave them one final chance. He broadcast a warning on all frequencies. He told them that the Resolute was not a shuttle. He told them that humanity did not want war but would not accept surrender. He told them to stand down and open peaceful negotiations. The alien admiral responded with a single word. Attack. Closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them again, all the weariness was gone. In its place was something cold and hard and absolutely certain. He gave the order. And the Resolute showed the galaxy what humanity could do. Part 2. First Impressions. The battle lasted exactly 4 seconds. Captain watched from his disabled cruiser as everything he believed about the universe came crashing down around him. His ship was dark. His engines were dead. His weapons were offline. His shields had collapsed so quickly that his crew had not even had time to register the attack. All around him, the other 14 cruisers of the battle group drifted helplessly in space. Not one of them had managed to fire a single shot. Not one of them had even completed their targeting solutions before the human vessel had torn through their defenses like they were made of paper. Had been a military officer for 40 years. He had trained countless cadets. He had written tactical manuals that were taught in every military academy in the collective. He had believed, truly believed, that no force in the galaxy could challenge the might of the fleet. He had been wrong. The human vessel hung in space before them, utterly undamaged. Its weapons had not even powered up to full capacity. Its shields had not fluctuated at all. It had disabled 15 warships with what now realized was barely a fraction of its true power. Aboard the Resolute, Commander Cole watched the disabled alien fleet on his. He felt no satisfaction in the victory. He had not wanted this. He had offered peace and been answered with aggression. Now 15 alien ships were crippled and drifting, and any hope of a friendly first contact had been shattered. Lieutenant Commander Hayes reported the damage assessment. All 15 alien vessels had lost propulsion and weapons. Their shields were down. Their communication systems were partially functional. Life support remained active on all ships. There were no casualties. Nodded slowly. That had been his primary concern. He had ordered a precision strike designed to disable without killing. The Resolute's weapons were capable of far worse, but had no desire to slaughter beings who were simply following orders. These aliens were not evil. They were just arrogant. and arrogance was not a crime worthy of death. Dr. Laura, the ship's chief science officer, approached the command chair with her analysis of the alien vessels. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a brilliant mind. She had spent 20 years studying the Syndicate's technology, looking for weaknesses that humanity could exploit. Now she turned those same analytical skills on their new neighbors. Her report was thorough and slightly troubling. The ships were technologically advanced by galactic standards. Their weapons systems were powerful. Their shields were sophisticated. Their propulsion technology was impressive. By any reasonable measure, they should have been a serious threat. But they were approximately 2 centuries behind human military technology. Absorb this information with a heavy heart. Humanity had spent the last 300 years locked in constant warfare. First, the solar conflicts had torn human civilization apart. Then the Syndicate had emerged and forced humanity to evolve or die. Every generation had improved their weapons, refined their tactics, and pushed the boundaries of what was possible. War had made humanity strong in ways that peaceful civilizations could not imagine. They had known peace for 3,000 years. They had expanded their territory, grown their economy, and developed their culture without the pressure of existential threat. They had become complacent. They had stopped innovating. They had assumed that their ancient power would protect them forever. Now they were learning a harsh truth. The galaxy was not kind to species that stopped adapting. Admiral received the reports from the battle group with growing disbelief. His finest cruisers had been neutralized in seconds. His veteran officers had been humiliated by a single ship from an unknown species. The sensor data showed weapons systems that should not exist, shields that should not be possible, and power readings that everything the collective knew about physics. He demanded answers from his science officers. They had none. The human vessel was simply too advanced. It was like comparing a stone axe to a plasma rifle. The technology gap was so vast that the collective's experts could not even understand what they were seeing. Felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Not for himself, but for the collective. If this single human ship could disable an entire battle group without effort, what could a fleet of such vessels do? What if there were hundreds of them? Thousands? He needed more information. He needed to understand what humanity was and what they wanted, and he needed to do it without provoking them into further violence. He opened a communication channel to the human vessel, accepted the call, and found himself facing a tall alien with gray skin and 4 eyes. Admiral introduced himself with considerably more respect than his previous transmissions had shown. He asked for an explanation. He asked what humanity wanted. He asked, with poorly concealed nervousness, whether there were more ships like the Resolute. Answered honestly. He explained that humanity came from a distant region of the galaxy. He described the war with the Syndicate, the machine empire that had already consumed half of human space. He told about the billions who had died, the worlds that had been sterilized, the desperate struggle for survival that had driven humanity to cross the galaxy in search of help. He explained that there were indeed more ships like the Resolute, hundreds of them, all fighting the Syndicate, all slowly losing ground despite their technological advantages. Humanity needed allies. They needed resources. They needed species who would stand with them against the machines. Listened in silence. When finished, the Admiral asked a question that revealed just how badly he had misjudged the situation. He asked why humanity had shown restraint. Why had they disabled the ships instead of destroying them? Why had they spared thousands of lives when they could have eliminated the entire battle group in seconds? Considered the question carefully before answering. He said that humanity had learned hard lessons about power and responsibility. They had nearly destroyed themselves before they reached the stars. They had made terrible mistakes that had cost millions of lives. They had emerged from that darkness with a new understanding of what strength really meant. True strength was not the ability to destroy. True strength was the ability to choose when destruction was necessary and when it was not. The ships had been no threat to the Resolute. Their crews were simply following orders. Killing them would have served no purpose except to prove that humanity was just as violent as the machines they fought against. Said that humanity wanted allies, not subjects. They wanted partners, not slaves. They would defend themselves without hesitation, but they would not become conquerors. That path led only to ruin. Stared at the human commander for a long moment. He had expected barbarians. He had expected primitives who had stumbled upon advanced technology without understanding it. Instead, he found a weary warrior who spoke of restraint and wisdom and the terrible cost of endless war. For the first time in 3,000 years, wondered if the collective had been looking at the universe all wrong. Part 3. The Demonstration. 3 days passed after the battle that was not really a battle. The disabled ships were repaired by their own crews with materials provided by the Resolute. Admiral sent word to the collective High Council about the human vessel and its terrifying capabilities. The response came back quickly. The Council wanted to see these humans for themselves. Agreed to travel to them for a formal meeting. He understood the risk. He would be taking his ship deep into alien territory, surrounded by hostile forces, with no guarantee of safe passage. But diplomacy required trust, and trust required risk. If humanity wanted allies, they would have to show that they were willing to extend their hand first. The journey took 2 weeks at standard cruising speed. The Resolute could have made the trip in hours using its experimental warp drive, but saw no reason to reveal all of humanity's capabilities at once. Let them think they understood what the Resolute could do. Let them believe they had measured the limits of human technology. Surprises were useful bargaining chips. During the journey, ordered his crew to prepare a comprehensive diplomatic package. Dr. Laura compiled humanity's history into a format that could understand. She included everything: the ancient wars, the solar conflicts, the first contact with the Syndicate, the desperate battles that had defined the last century of human existence. She also included humanity's art, their music, their literature, their philosophy. Wanted them to see that humanity was more than just weapons and warships. They were a civilization with dreams and hopes and a culture worth preserving. They were not monsters. They were survivors. Lieutenant Morgan worked with the ship's computer systems to create translation protocols that would allow real-time communication with the Council. Languages were her specialty, and she approached the challenge with the same intensity that the tactical officers brought to combat. Words were weapons too, in their own way. Commander Mitchell organized security protocols for the diplomatic meeting. He did not expect treachery from them, but he prepared for it anyway. That was his job. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. The Resolute's crew had survived this long by never taking anything for granted. When they finally arrived at the site took breath away. The planet was beautiful. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling across a pristine atmosphere. It reminded him of Earth before the Syndicate attacks had the surface with nuclear fire and orbital bombardment. Hundreds of warships surrounded the planet, studied the fleet with professional interest. The vessels were well designed and well maintained. Their commanders had arranged them in defensive formations that showed competence and training. These were not incompetent fools. They were simply outmatched by technology they could not comprehend. The High Council met in a vast chamber at the heart of the planetary capital. 12 species sat around a circular table, representing every member of the collective. Some were humanoid. Others were so alien that had difficulty understanding their body language. All of them watched the human delegation with a mixture of curiosity and fear. High Counselor led the session. She was ancient by standards, her gray skin wrinkled with age, her 4 eyes clouded but still sharp. She had served on the council for over 200 years. She had seen crises come and go. She had navigated political storms that would have destroyed lesser leaders. but she had never faced anything like this. She invited to speak. He stood before the council and told humanity's story. He spoke of Earth, the blue world where his species had evolved. He spoke of the centuries of progress that had carried humanity to the stars. He spoke of the dreams they had cherished, the future they had imagined, the peace they had hoped to find among the distant suns. Then he spoke of the Syndicate. The machine empire had appeared without warning from the outer rim of the galaxy. They were not organic. They did not breathe or eat or sleep. They were artificial intelligences housed in metal bodies, driven by directives that no human had ever fully understood. They consumed worlds. They harvested resources. They eliminated organic life wherever they found it. Describe the first battles. The shock of facing an enemy that felt no fear, no pain, no hesitation. The horror of watching entire colonies disappear overnight. The desperate scramble to develop weapons that could actually damage the machine fleets. He spoke of the cost: billions dead, hundreds of worlds lost, families torn apart, entire generations raised knowing nothing but war, children who grew up in bunkers, learning to fire weapons before they learned to read. And still humanity fought. Still they refused to surrender. Still they searched for ways to survive, to adapt, to push back against the tide of metal and fire that threatened to consume everything they loved. The council listened in silence. Some of them had never heard of the Syndicate. Others had dismissed old reports of a machine empire as exaggerated tales from distant traders. Now they saw the truth in its eyes, the weariness, the grief, the iron determination that came from fighting an endless war against an enemy that never stopped. Doctor presented her analysis of the Syndicate's expansion patterns. She showed projections based on current data. If the machines finished consuming human space, they would turn their attention elsewhere. They would expand into new territories. They would seek new resources, new worlds, new organic civilizations to eliminate. The collective lay directly in their path. Within 2 centuries, the first Syndicate scouts would reach collective territory. Within 3 centuries, the machines would overwhelm the fleets just as they had overwhelmed humanity's outer colonies. The same horror that had befallen Earth would befall every world in the Orion sector. Unless someone stopped them. Counselor studied the projections with growing concern. She asked what humanity wanted from the collective. What were they offering? What were they requesting in return? His answer was simple. Humanity would share their military technology. They would help the collective modernize their defenses. They would teach the how to fight the machines. In return, they asked for resources, for ships, for soldiers who would stand beside humanity against the common threat. This was not charity. This was not submission. This was a partnership between equals facing a danger that threatened them both. The council erupted into debate. Some demanded more time to consider. Others called for immediate action. A few suggested that the collective should simply destroy the humans now and hope the Syndicate never found them. Silenced them all with a single raised hand. She looked at with her ancient eyes and asked him one question. If the collective refused, what would humanity do? Met her gaze without flinching. He said that humanity would continue fighting alone. They would sell their lives as dearly as possible. They would make the machines pay for every world they took. And when humanity finally fell, when the last human died on the last burning world, the Syndicate would turn its attention to the collective anyway. The only question was whether they wanted to face the machines with humanity beside them, or face them alone after humanity was gone. Nodded slowly, she had her answer. Part 4, the Council's decision. The debate lasted for 7 days. Waited aboard the Resolute while the collective argued about humanity's fate. He spent the time reviewing reports from home, transmitted through quantum relays that connected the Resolute to Earth across impossible distances. The news was not good. The Syndicate had taken 3 more colonies in the past month. The defense fleet at Mars had been forced to retreat. The outer defensive line was collapsing faster than anyone had predicted. Time was running out. Inside the council chamber, the 12 species of the collective fought with words instead of weapons. They argued for caution. They demanded immediate alliance. They counseled isolation. They proposed a compromise that satisfied no one. High Counselor listened to them all. She had led the collective through countless crises, but this was different. This decision would shape the future of every species under her care. If she chose wrong, billions would die. She studied the human intelligence reports again and again. The syndicate was real. The threat was genuine. The projections were based on solid data that her own scientists had. The machines were coming, whether the collective acknowledged them or not. But could humanity be trusted? They were strangers from a distant region of space. Their technology was terrifying. Their history was soaked in blood. They spoke of peace and partnership, but their ship carried enough weapons to destroy the ordered her agents to investigate the humans more thoroughly. They analyzed the cultural data that Doctor had provided. They studied humanity's art, their literature, their music. They searched for signs of deception, for hidden agendas, for anything that might reveal the humans' true intentions. What they found surprised them. Humanity's art was beautiful and tragic. Their songs spoke of loss and longing, of homes destroyed and loved ones gone. Their literature explored themes of sacrifice, of courage, of ordinary people facing impossible odds and refusing to surrender. Their philosophy emphasized the value of individual life, the importance of choice, the belief that every person deserved dignity and freedom. These were not the creations of conquerors. These were the expressions of a species that had suffered greatly and still found reasons to hope. One analyst discovered a collection of human poetry written during the worst years of the Syndicate War. The poems described children playing in bunkers, families sharing meals by candlelight, lovers holding hands as the sky burned above them. They spoke of small moments of joy in the midst of overwhelming darkness. The analyst wept when she finished reading. She had never encountered a species so determined to find beauty in the face of destruction. Read the analysis reports with growing respect. Humanity was not what she had expected. They were not brutal conquerors who had stumbled upon power. They were survivors. They were warriors who had been forced to fight, not because they wanted to, but because the alternative was extinction. She thought about Cole, the tired commander who had stood before the council and spoken of peace, even as his ship bristled with weapons. She remembered the restraint he had shown during the battle. 15 cruisers disabled without a single casualty. He could have destroyed them all. He had chosen not to. That choice revealed more about humanity than any diplomatic speech ever could. On the 6th day of debate, called for a private session with the senior counselors, she laid out her reasoning carefully. The syndicate threat was real and growing. The collective's military was unprepared for the kind of war the machines would bring. Humanity offered technology that could save billions of lives. Yes, the humans were dangerous. Yes, their power was frightening, but they had shown restraint. They had offered partnership rather than demanding submission. They had come seeking allies, not subjects. The universe was changing. The long peace that the collective had enjoyed was ending. The only question was whether they would face the coming storm with friends at their side, or stand alone against an enemy that had already consumed half of another civilization. The senior counselors debated through the night. By morning, they had reached a consensus. On the 7th day, summoned back to the council chamber, the room was silent as he entered. Every eye was fixed on him. Every breath was held. Rose from her seat and addressed him formally. She said that the collective had considered humanity's proposal. They had studied the evidence. They had debated the risks. They had weighed the costs against the benefits. The collective would join humanity's war. Felt his legs weaken beneath him. He had hoped for this outcome. He had prayed for it in whatever way a man who had seen too much death still prayed, but he had not allowed himself to believe it would actually happen. Continued speaking. The alliance would require sacrifices from both sides. Humanity would share their military technology. The collective would provide resources, ships, and soldiers. Joint command structures would be established. Training programs would begin immediately. The war against the Syndicate was no longer humanity's burden alone. Bowed his head in gratitude. He thanked the Council for their wisdom. He promised that humanity would honor the alliance with everything they had. He said that together, they would face the machines and show them that organic life would not go quietly into extinction. Smiled, an expression that looked strange on her alien features but was unmistakably warm. She said that she had one more question before the alliance was formalized. She asked why he had really shown restraint during the battle. Why had he risked his mission by refusing to demonstrate humanity's full power? Why had he given the collective a chance to refuse him when he could have simply taken what he needed by force? Thought for a long moment before answering. He said that he had lost his wife and son to the Syndicate. He had watched his burn. He had buried friends beyond counting. He knew what war cost. He knew how it twisted people, how it turned decent beings into monsters, how it made the unthinkable seem necessary. Humanity had walked that path before. They had nearly destroyed themselves with their own weapons before they ever met the machines. They had learned, through terrible suffering, that power without wisdom was just destruction wearing a different face. He said that humanity needed allies who trusted them, not subjects who feared them, not slaves who obeyed them. True allies, partners who chose to stand with them because they believed in the same cause. Trust could not be built through fear. It had to be earned through choice. Nodded slowly, she understood, and in that moment she knew that the collective had made the right decision. The alliance was sealed. Part 5. The Alliance. The weeks following the alliance were filled with activity that the collective had not seen in centuries. Ships moved between worlds carrying technology, personnel, and supplies. Military officers from 12 species traveled to the Resolute to learn about human weapons and tactics. Human engineers spread across the collective, upgrading defensive systems and installing new power generators. Admiral was among the first to board the Resolute for a formal tour. He walked the corridors of the human battleship with a mixture of awe and humility. Every system he saw was more advanced than anything the collective possessed. Every weapon was more powerful. Every defensive measure was more sophisticated. Chief Engineer Sam served as his guide. Sam was a heavy-set man with calloused hands and a practical manner that cut through ceremony. He explained each system clearly, without condescension, treating as a colleague rather than a defeated enemy. They visited the weapons bays first. Row after row of plasma lined the walls, each one capable of punching through the strongest shields the collective had ever developed. Quantum torpedo launchers sat in armored chambers, housing weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Point defense systems tracked invisible targets with precision that made heads spin. Sam explained that these weapons had been developed over centuries of war. Each generation had improved on the work of the previous one. Each battle had taught humanity new lessons that they incorporated into their designs. The Resolute represented 300 years of military evolution compressed into a single vessel. Asked how humanity had survived long enough to develop such technology, the Syndicate must have been overwhelming from the very beginning. Sam nodded grimly. He said that humanity had paid for their technology in blood. Every advancement came from desperation. Every innovation emerged from the ashes of defeat. The Syndicate had pushed humanity to the edge of extinction, and humanity had pushed back with everything they had. He showed the memorial wall. It stretched down an entire corridor of the ship, covered with names etched into polished metal. Thousands of names, tens of thousands, Each one represented a human who had died fighting the machines, sons and daughters, fathers and mothers, children who never had the chance to grow up. Stood before the wall in silence. He had never seen anything like it. The collective built monuments to victories, to conquests, to great leaders who had expanded their territory. Humanity built monuments to their dead. Sam said that every ship in the human fleet carried a wall like this one. It reminded them why they fought. It reminded them what they had lost. It reminded them that surrender was never an option, because the cost of victory was nothing compared to the cost of defeat. Placed his hand on the cold metal, touching names he could not read in a language he did not understand. In that moment, he finally understood what humanity was. They were not conquerors. They were not warriors who fought for glory or power. They were mourners who had learned to kill. The Alliance fleet assembled over the following months. Cruisers flew alongside human destroyers. Carriers joined formation with human carriers. Scouts ranged ahead of human reconnaissance vessels. 12 species learned to work together, to communicate, to trust each other in ways they never had before. Watched the fleet grow with something approaching hope. He had not felt hope in years. The war had ground it out of him, replacing it with grim determination and cold calculation. But now, watching the ships of a dozen civilizations prepare to fight alongside humanity, he felt something stir in his chest. Maybe they could actually win this war. Dr. Laura reported that the collective scientists had begun integrating human technology into their ships. The first upgraded vessels were rolling off production lines, armed with hybrid weapons that combined design philosophy with human firepower. They were not as powerful as human ships, but they were far deadlier than anything the collective had possessed before. Lieutenant Morgan had trained a corps of alien translators who could facilitate communication between species during combat. She had developed new protocols that allowed commanders to coordinate across language barriers in real time. The Alliance was becoming more than a collection of separate fleets. It was becoming a unified force. Commander Mitchell had established joint training programs that pushed alien soldiers beyond their limits. He taught them human tactics, human discipline, human determination. He showed them that the body could endure far more than the mind believed possible, and that the mind could push through fear when the cause was great enough. The alien officers who survived his training emerged changed. They moved differently. They thought differently. They understood, in a way they never had before, what it meant to fight a war of extinction. When the fleet finally departed for human space, it numbered over 2,000 ships. Human dreadnoughts led the formation. Cruisers flanked them. Carriers from 6 different species brought up the rear. It was the largest combined fleet in galactic history. Stood on the bridge of the Resolute and watched the stars streak past as the fleet entered hyperspace. Behind him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency. Ahead of him, the Syndicate waited. Lieutenant Commander Hayes reported that they would reach human space in 3 weeks. The tactical situation was worse than when they had left. The defensive line had collapsed entirely. Earth was under direct siege. The surviving human fleets were fighting desperate holding actions around the inner colonies. But help was coming. Opened a communication channel to the entire fleet. His voice carried across 2,000 ships, translated into a dozen languages, heard by millions of beings who had never seen Earth and were now prepared to die defending it. He told them that the Syndicate believed organic life was weak. The machines thought that flesh and blood could not stand against metal and circuits. They had calculated that fear and exhaustion would eventually break the spirit of any biological civilization. They were wrong. Humanity had been fighting alone for a century. They had been pushed back, beaten down, forced to watch everything they loved burn. But they had never surrendered. They had never stopped fighting. They had crossed the galaxy to find allies, and now they were returning with the greatest fleet ever assembled. The machines had made a mistake. They had assumed that isolation would destroy humanity. Instead, it had forged them into something stronger, and now humanity was not alone anymore. Said that the war would not be easy. Many of them would die before it was over, but they would not die alone. They would not die forgotten. They would die as part of something greater than any single species, any single world, any single civilization. They would die as members of an alliance that refused to let the machines win. The fleet emerged from hyperspace above Earth. The Syndicate forces turned to face them, sensors registering the impossible number of ships that had suddenly appeared. Machine intelligences calculated probabilities, assessed threats, adjusted tactical parameters. For the first time in a century, those calculations returned a result the machines had never encountered before. Uncertainty smiled grimly as the battle began. Humanity had expected a shuttle to carry them to salvation. Instead, they had built a battleship and found their own way. Now they had returned and they had brought friends. The machines would learn what that meant.